once this deed is done, you are damaged goods. Who's going to want you after that? I had vowed to save myself for marriage. I had a purity ring. I'd signed the purity pledges. And so my dad would brag about that from the pulpit of like, well, my daughter, April, she's saving herself for marriage and I'm so proud of her. And there was this kid, he came up to me, he goes, hey, you're that virgin chick. And I remember that was the first time that I felt really gross about my dad and then even me, like talking publicly about being a virgin. And also I was so young. We were obviously Pentecostal, so we believed in faith healing, once, as long as you have enough faith that God would answer your prayer. I knew that I could not have had more faith for my dad to be healed. And he died 4 months after his diagnosis. And we had hundreds of people from all over the world, probably even thousands, praying for my dad's healing. We had people tell us God didn't heal my dad because my dad was out of God's will, because he was pastoring at the time instead of doing evangelism. And we had people that kind of did the more gaslighting route where they say, well, God did actually heal your dad. He just gave him his ultimate healing in heaven. I did all the right things that I was told to. And I literally thought that God didn't heal my dad because I had had sex before marriage.
Ugh.
I think because I loved my brother, I was willing to question my theology. In the moment when he came out to me, it was another moment where my heart disagreed with my head. The indoctrination that was telling me, you can't enable this. You don't want your brother to go to hell. I wanted the theology to be wrong because I loved my brother so much, but I also really loved God.
Mine is the only voice.
What have I been doing?
Lay down my autonomy.
After that, it got very dark very quickly.
Hey, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening and you'd like to see our faces and join the conversation, go to YouTube instead at Cults to Consciousness. We have such an incredible community. We appreciate all of those kind words that you leave for our guests. Not only does it make them feel seen, supported, loved, and heard, but it boosts the algorithm. So best way to support the show is by interacting with the post. Today's guest, I was so excited to finally connect with her. I'd been following her for a couple of years, actually, waiting for the right moment to bring her onto the show. She is part of the documentary second season on Amazon Prime of Shiny Happy People. So first season blew up. We had so many people from that doc come on and speak to their stories. She is now on this season, which by today, once this comes out, it will already have been released, but we are recording this before it releases. So we're excited to hear her full perspective on that and also talk more about the ins and outs of her story. Thank you so much for joining us, April Ajoy.
Yay, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And you also just released a book, Star-Spangled Jesus, which is so awesome. And we're definitely going to get into all of the details because I know that's more toward the end of your story. But what has it been like having released a book and now being part of this documentary?
It's really been a wild ride because I had interviewed for the docuseries about 5 or 6 months before my book released. So there was just a lot of waiting, because when you write a book, you have to wait a long time before that's published. And then when you interview for a docuseries, you have to wait over a year now for it to release. And you have no idea what all's going to make it in, if you're even going to make it in, because my spouse is a filmmaker. So I know there's a good chance I could get completely cut. But I saw that I was in the trailer, so I don't think I'm completely cut. So.
Yeah, that's so exciting. What did they bring you on to talk about specifically?
I'm kind of teen mania adjacent. So this series is focusing on Teen Mania, the Honor Academy, and Ron Luce, who kind of headed up that ministry. I was never an intern with Teen Mania, but I went to all the Acquire the Fires. I loved Acquire the Fire. I was obsessed with it. But I think my part, from what I was told, was kind of to shine a light on how the rhetoric used within Teen Mania and from Ron Luce was very mainstream in evangelical youth group culture in the 90s and 2000s, and to shine light on Christian nationalism, because a big piece of, not just Ron Luce, but youth ministries all over was we were raising warriors for Christ, and that we were going to change the world, and that we had to change America to be a Christian nation. And there was a lot of martyr talk because this was, came on the heels of the Columbine shooting I remember being in kids' church and being asked, like, if a gunman comes into your school and has a gun to your head and asks you if you believe in God, do you say yes and die a martyr but go to heaven, or do you say no and betray your God?
What?
Like
That's extreme.
that was very a regular occurrence. And I actually, after I went to Acquire the Fire, I think the second time, they talked about the Honor Academy, which is, a big piece of the docuseries where you have interns that come in, and I really wanted to do it. And I went to my parents and I begged them, I was like, can I please do this? And they would not let me because they're like, well, you're too busy with our ministry. Because my dad was a pastor and evangelist. So we had our own ministry going on, but the mission was very similar to the goals of what Ron Luce and Teen Mania had.
Yeah, and I completely forgot to mention you have a huge platform where you share stories, skits. I find it really refreshing to follow because you talk about very real parts of growing up this way, the darker parts, but with a comedic twist. And so it's easy to digest and absorb the information. And yeah, love your channel. Love what you're doing over there. I don't know if you call Instagram a channel. Love your Instagram and what you're doing over there. You have so many good little nuggets of information. And so if anyone is interested, definitely go check out our Instagram. We'll link everything in the description. So all that to say, having followed you for a while and seeing little tiny snippets of your life, of what you went through, now I'm excited to dive into the full story. So let's talk a little bit about your parents, their ministry, and how that affected you as a child growing up.
Sure. I don't know where you want to begin, but it's long. Back to the beginning. My grandfather was a pastor. When I was born, he pastored a very large church in Dallas, Texas. That's where I'm from. And my dad co-pastored with him. And this was in the 90s. And we had about 4,000 members in this church, this was kind of before mega churches were everywhere and there were satellite campuses all over the place. Both my dad and my grandfather were on local and sometimes national Christian TV and Christian radio. So I very much kind of grew up in the Christian spotlight. We were Pentecostal. So especially if you were in the more charismatic denominations or sects of Christianity, my dad was relatively well known. My dad's entire ministry that I completely agreed with was to just save as many souls as possible because, we believed in a literal hell, that if you did not accept Jesus as your savior and believe that Jesus died and rose again and said the sinner's prayer and all the things that go into that, if you didn't believe that you would go to hell for all of eternity when you died. And I don't ever have a memory of not knowing what hell was or the rapture, which that's a whole other theology. But so we grew up just being taught that if you came in contact with another person who was not a Christian and you did not witness, which witness was our term for proselytizing. So if you did not witness to someone and tell them about Jesus and they were to die that day or die before they could hear about Jesus, that their blood would be on your hands.
On you?
Yeah, it was a very regular thought. So I remember, growing up when you're little, I didn't think much of it. Me and my brothers would argue over whose turn it was to witness to the waitress when we would go into restaurants. And we would just say little things like, "Oh, Jesus loves you." And, if it went well, my dad could pray with the person. And I was saying, like, my dad was a very, very likable person. I think there are people that are in this world that are in it for money or for the spotlight or for whatever the reason. From living with my dad, he was a true believer and genuinely had good intentions in wanting to save people from hell. If that's what you genuinely believe, it's a noble thing, but it doesn't come without its harm, especially when you grow up in that as a child. So as I became more socially aware and realized it's not really cool to just go up to strangers and tell them about Jesus, I would start witnessing a little less. And then I would feel really guilty if I didn't witness to somebody at the grocery store or whatever, because I felt like, oh, well, what if they die and their blood is going to be on my hands? So it's a very heavy mindset to carry with you all the time, but you don't realize it in the moment until you've left it or you look back on it.
Yeah, it's truly constantly on your mind. If you are punished for not only the sins that you commit, but the things that you didn't do, that's, I mean, you could be thinking about it 24/7.
Yeah. The belief in hell and that whoever does not believe the way you believe is going to go to hell is very mainstream in American evangelicalism. And if you take that belief to its truest form, if you become a true believer, then you have to basically tell everybody about Jesus, about the gospel, or risk having their blood in their hands. Like that's the natural progression. And then constantly having to carry the guilt of not doing that if you don't witness is a very heavy thing.
Yeah. What about when you're witnessing as a child to these adults and they're not receptive? Did that ever happen to where maybe it could have been a little bit unsafe to be talking to strangers, or was that never the case?
I don't remember ever an unsafe moment. I mean, usually my parents were with me, unless I was in school. Was witness to a lot of I was homeschooled until 7th grade, and then I went to public school my 7th grade year, was convinced I was going to be persecuted because that's what they talk about. The Christians are going to be persecuted. And I wasn't, but that's another story. I think most people, when they see little kids coming up to them and trying to pray with them, they think it's cute. Even if they're annoyed by it. There was never any negative experience that I saw.
That's good.
Yeah, and then once you witness, even if they don't accept Jesus, you at least planted the seed, right? And then you did your duty, and so the blood's no longer on. Like you have a clear conscience after that.
Yeah. So let's talk about the traveling, because you were out in the world quite a bit as a kid.
My grandfather was a pastor, my dad co-pastor, but was also an evangelist. So we would travel in a motorhome all over America. My dad would preach in different churches. Me, my 2 brothers, and my mom, we would all sing before he would preach. And then we also traveled all over the world. My dad would preach in different really large churches, small churches, stadiums, giant fields. If you ever saw ministries promoting, just huge crusades. That's what they were called. Just huge services where there was just people as far as the eye can see. That's what my dad did and what our ministry did. A lot of countries in Africa and Asia and Europe, it just kind of went all over. So I did get to see a lot of the world. I had a very unique childhood that, I had a good childhood. Like my parents were really great and loving. And from that angle, I don't have complaints, but the entire world is just a very heavy ideology to believe. There's a lot of fear involved because they would teach you as kids. And I'm not just talking about my parents, I'm talking about children's pastors and youth pastors and kids' TV shows. Because I don't think unless someone grows up in an evangelical environment, you don't realize how all-consuming the belief system is, because you're not only hearing it from your parents, you're not only hearing it from your schooling, if you're homeschooled or go to a Christian school, you're hearing it from Christian TV, Christian radio, Christian movies, Christian shows. There's no aspect of your life where you cannot just get it from a Christian version of that. And when I say Christian, there's over 45,000 Christian denominations worldwide. So I'm talking about specifically a very narrow fundamentalist idea of American evangelicalism, which is the minority of Christianity globally and is very co-opted by Christian nationalism, which is basically this belief that America was founded as a Christian nation, that God has supernaturally blessed America in all of our wars and all of our conquests, that basically kind of gifted our land to Americans. So it's a very whitewashed history. It kind of ignores the genocide of indigenous people. It ignores a lot of, really brutal realities of slavery, all of that. It just ignores that, because if you believe that America was a Christian nation, then you have to believe in American exceptionalism and that America was always good because you believe that God is good. And if you believe God is good, you cannot admit any atrocities caused by America. America has to always be the good guy. And if America was not, then that calls into question who God is, because the two are so interconnected.
Yeah, that's a deep rabbit hole that I know we're going to explore too. There's so many great tangents that I want to talk about. So, but first, going back to you as a little one, You were probably so proud of your dad to be this public figure and to travel the world and be like, yeah, that's my dad. Were you really invested in the doctrine and this whole idea of your family is saving thousands of people?
Oh, yeah. I was very close with my dad. My dad was my biggest hero, and I wanted to be just like him. Like, there was nothing I wanted more than for my dad to be proud of me, and he was very proud of me, and I mean, I believed everything. I fully bought it all the way, through high school and college. My dad was my best friend. He would talk to me about not just Christianity and theology, but politics, and we were on the same page with everything. And my goal in life was to grow up and help my dad with his ministry. He was everything.
Oh, that's really sweet. Let's talk about the challenges of being a pastor's daughter and traveling and not having really any roots to tie into.
I missed out on some things by not going to school, being homeschooled. I became very close with my two brothers who they're twins. And so I feel like they were kind of my best friends because we just did everything together. I think early on I didn't notice the pressures quite as much because when you're a kid, it's not like you're doing anything terrible. I mean, I felt like I was doing terrible things because I would still say the sinner's prayer all the time and go up to the altar call in kids' church just to make sure that I was saved. Because they would teach you that as long as you accepted Jesus, that you would go to heaven and you didn't have to worry about it. And also, you should never sin or think anything bad or get too angry or get too competitive or be mean or or do anything bad just in case the rapture happens and you get left behind, or you die and go to hell and get hit by a bus. So it was a fine line between those two things. But definitely as I got older, you hear what people say about you. And my dad was not shy in talking about stories that me and my brothers would say or do. They'd get turned into sermon illustrations. I
Oh.
think the thing that probably was the most harmful in hindsight, and I don't think he meant anything by it because it wasn't just my dad, it was all the people in that culture. Purity culture was kind of at its peak in the 90s and 2000s. You had books like I Kissed Dating Goodbye, which was about the importance of courting and never dating, because if you date and break up, you're like preparing yourself for divorce. All the sermon illustrations and youth group about a girl's purity being compared to, if you're not pure and you don't save yourself for your husband, you become a chewed up piece of gum, you become a trampled rose, you become a ripped piece of paper. A lot of examples that all just objectify girls and women. And so my dad, though, which I started off being proud of this because I had vowed to save myself for marriage. I had a purity ring. I'd signed the purity pledges. And so my dad would brag about that from the pulpit of like, well, my daughter, April, she's saving herself for marriage and I'm so proud of her and she's going to be pure and all that stuff.
That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Did you know that data brokers are stealing your personal information from places like court records, social media profiles, and they're stealing your addresses, your phone numbers, your emails, and even your social security numbers? They're selling this information to companies and even people who are trying to scam you and steal your identity. It's really, really scary out there. Data breaches worldwide increase every year, but in 2023, it went up 73% compared to the year before. As someone with a large platform calling out cult leaders, online security is very important to us, which is why we personally use Incogni. They remove your data daily from people's search sites and other companies that steal your personal information without your consent. Since signing up, they've already removed our data from over 400 sites, and we had no idea how exposed we were before. Signing up is super easy, and you can cancel anytime with their 30-day money-back guarantee. And just for watching this video, they are offering our supporters 60% off their annual plan. So if you value your online security, now is the perfect time to try it out risk-free. Go to incogni.com/Shalise, and the discount code, which is Shalise, should auto-populate for you. But just in case, we have put the link in the description so you can check it out. Thanks, guys. Back to our video.
And I remember one time I was probably 13 or 14 and we were at some church. I don't even remember which church it was, but I had gone to the youth group, so I wasn't in the service. So I don't really know what my dad said, but I remember I came out And there was this kid who's probably a couple years older than me, so maybe 15. He came up to me, he goes, "Hey, you're that virgin chick." And I remember that was the first time that I felt really gross about my dad
Yeah.
and then even me, like talking publicly about being a virgin. And also I was so young. Like in the moment that part wasn't resonating, but in hindsight, like being like why are we talking about young teenage girls' virginity? Like it's this.
Prize.
Yeah. So there are things like that, which just kind of added to the pressure. I did want to stay pure. That was my vow, but then as I started dating, my teenage hormones like kicked in and I started really wanting to do some things physically because that's just a normal, natural human desire. But I was very adamant, like no sex. Like we would not do the actual sex because, when you're a kid or a teenager, you find loopholes. Like you can read the Bible. Like, well, the Bible doesn't technically say anything about this. It's only
Uh-huh.
the virgin piece. I was prudish, but not too prudish because I definitely explored some things, but never had sex. And I felt like that was fine. That was good enough. But I will say when I got in this like trigger warning, because I'm going to talk about assaults for a second. All of the purity talks, they never discussed consent. It was always once you do this deed, once this deed is done, you are damaged goods. Who's going to want you after that? You're no longer pure. Like you can never straighten back out a crumpled piece of paper. But consent was never once discussed, whether or not you choose that. And so I had an unfortunate experience when I was 21. So I was in college. I was at a Christian college with a Christian guy from this college. My first time was not consensual. I just felt so dirty and I felt so much shame and I blamed myself because I had only ever been taught that like consent was not even was just a foreign concept to me and all I knew was before this moment I had never done this and after this moment I can't say that anymore and I felt so much shame and I felt so violated but I didn't know who to talk to. I was just gonna like carry that, like take it to my grave. I remember my dad actually called me the day after, and I had told myself I was not going to tell him because he would be so disappointed. When you're in that world as a girl, I really think the worst thing that you could do is for people to find out that you had had sex or like become pregnant because I had seen the shame that they'd put on other girls that were in youth group that did become pregnant, like the awful things that they would say about her. And I had convinced myself this was never anything my dad said, but it was just a feeling like I felt like he would rather me kill somebody than like find out I was pregnant. So I was not
Yeah.
going to tell him, but I was really close with my dad. He was still my hero in the midst of all of this. And so he had called me just to check in on me. And I just started crying on the phone and asked me what was wrong. And I've tried not to tell him for the longest time, but I eventually gave in and I told him. And he actually really surprised me in that moment and just said, April, like, this was not your fault.
Wow.
You should not feel shame over this. It's like one of my better memories with my dad because I know like there's a lot of things that he taught that in hindsight I find very harmful. Things that I also perpetuated. So it's not just him, it was that whole world. But I do think when push came to shove, he always chose the person in front of him. And in that moment, he chose me and not the doctrine. And I think that helped save me from going to a really, really dark place at that time.
Yeah. Wow. It's beautiful that in that moment he actually chose to be Christ-like, the thing that
Mhm.
Christians are supposed to emulate and not casting the stones. And that's really amazing that he was able to see you for you, like you said, and disregard some of the things that he may have even taught himself.
Yeah, it was very healing. Now it's much, he was supportive and was there for me, but you can't just undo a lifetime of
Of
shame.
course.
So I still felt a lot of shame after that. And just a couple years later, my dad actually was diagnosed with stage 4 non-smokers lung cancer. So it was very rare. And we were obviously Pentecostal, so we believed in faith healing, once as long as you have enough faith that God would answer your prayer. And I knew that I could not have had more faith for my dad to be healed And he died 4 months after his diagnosis.
Oh, wow.
It, like, immediately opened the door to know, like, well, I know that theology is wrong because I did all the right things that I was told to, and I did not get what I was told would happen. God did not answer my prayer. This is the really sad part. You're also taught in these purity things that not only will God bless your marriage and give you the best sex ever if you save yourself, but if you don't, God will do things drastically in your life to put you back on the righteous path. Like if you start, like the prodigal son, if you start sinning and doing things that aren't good, that God would do things to wake you up and bring you back. In the year leading up to my dad's passing, I had started dating a guy who was not a Christian. He was agnostic. It was kind of like, I guess, my rebel phase because I was feeling so much shame after the assault that I just kind of told myself if I'm going to feel this much shame and feel this dirty, I might as well have sex that I enjoy and do it on my terms.
Same. That happened to me. So,
Really?
April, I just have to say, like, your whole story of it being non-consensual and not having the understanding of consent and not knowing how to say no and the black and white thinking of, well, I'm ruined, so might as well. That was me. That exact
Mhm.
same thing happened to me because I grew up in Mormonism, and so everything you've spoken about so far is resonant as far as the purity culture goes, and every member a missionary and all of that. Not to the same extent as you, but just wanted to give more credence to what you're saying as far as I understand the mindset of, well, shit. I'm already
Yeah.
ruined. Ours was the licked cupcake analogy where they would bring cupcakes
Mm.
in and lick it. Who wants it now? And everyone's like, not me. So
Yeah.
I know what it feels like to feel like you're completely worthless and I'm ruined. So may as well have fun with it. Or if I'm already a sinner and there's no going back, well, why? And that's the issue that they don't talk about. And I want to hear your
Right.
opinion on this. Nobody says, well, if something happens, you can always choose to continue on the way you were trying to before. Or, if you make a mistake, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. You can still remain chaste. That's the word they would use. You can still make those choices to wait with your
Mm.
next partner until marriage if that's what you choose. No one has those discussions. It's just either
No.
you wait or you don't. And if you don't wait, then you're ruined. And so it
Yeah.
kind of creates this nihilism of like, well, nothing matters. And I'm just going to go in the complete opposite direction of extreme because it's over.
Yeah, I will say, like, this world in general really lacks nuance. It's very black and white.
Yeah.
It's either right or it's wrong. Like, I understand why people say that because you're also taught, like, it doesn't matter what you've done. You can come to the cross and God's going to forgive you. And it can be this quick, almost renewal that happens and you just feel new and you feel whole. That did not happen for me. And I prayed so much after it happened. I begged God to forgive me, feeling like it was my fault, knowing like, well, I shouldn't have gone on a date with this guy and I shouldn't have, all the things that you tell yourself. And it doesn't work. It just doesn't work like that. You can't tell young kids that this thing is the most important thing. And then there's so much, not just about virginity, but there was just also so much emphasis put on the importance of getting married. Like your whole
Hmm.
purpose, especially as a woman, was
Hmm.
to find a husband, to support him and to build a family and to do all of that stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when you put your entire worth in that and you're taught that your virginity is a gift to your husband. But once you're not a virgin, that's it. That gift is gone. You're never going to be what you could have been. It
Hmm.
doesn't matter what someone tells you after the fact. You've already heard a lifetime of the opposite. It's just so damaging. At the end of the day, like looking back to, like, obviously I've deconstructed and rethought a lot about sex and a lot about why is this so damaging? What does this actually mean? Like, where are the damaging parts? So I feel very differently about it now. But it's like, it's just so stupid. Like it's so dumb that we've put all this so much pressure, especially on girls, because the boys always got a little bit of a pass because boys will be boys and they can't control
Yeah.
themselves. And
Ugh.
so much pressure was put on the girls on modesty. We have to protect the boys' eyes. We got to cover our
Yep.
shoulders. We got to cover our knees. And it's really unfair, especially when you actually go back to the scriptures where Jesus says, like, if your eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out. It doesn't say go cover up whatever caused your eye to stumble. It's literally, no, gouge out your eye. That's what Jesus said. And we've taken that and just ignored it and been like, no, we need to cover up. We just need to, the boys need to be protected at all costs.
Yeah, I agree. It's so frustrating. So you're in this mindset, you're in this rebellious relationship. What happens?
So I had decided I was going to sleep with whoever I did next. So him and I we were sleeping together. And I was surprised at how I didn't necessarily feel as guilty as I thought I would for it in a weird way. But I felt guilty for not feeling guilty. So I did feel guilty. And I had just told myself, I kind of thought maybe Satan's just kind of leading me astray right now. But whatever, I was still Christian. I still asked Jesus to forgive me after every time. In hindsight, it was just me taking my power back. And in a weird way, I'm proud of myself for doing that, for just saying, I'm not going to let someone else make me feel shame. I'm going to feel shame on my own, dang it. But
yep, I get that.
But after all of that, so I dated this guy for about 2 years, and my dad gets cancer and then dies. And because of all of that, God will punish you if you're not living right. And and I knew I was having sex and I knew that was bad. I literally thought that God didn't heal my dad because I had had sex before marriage.
Oh.
And so then I threw myself hardcore back into purity culture, broke up with my boyfriend at the time, and didn't do anything again until I got married to my now spouse. Kind of became the secondary virgin. I don't know if you ever saw that, but when I was in college, I went to a Christian college. We had a purity week, and this was before the events of everything that I just said. But in this purity week, they had mandatory chapel morning and evening, and it was all about purity. Special emphasis on the girls. There was one pastor who got up and said that he had seen God restore girls' hymens.
Stop.
Swear. So that they could be physical virgins again for their husbands. And it was about like God being able to give you virginity again, even if you had already quote unquote messed up. So on the purity culture pledge that we had at that place, you would say like, I, April, am and you would check either virgin or secondary virgin. And secondary virgin meant you technically had sex, but you were becoming a secondary virgin through God.
Oh my gosh. This is too much. Why do they care so much about women's vaginas?
Oh my gosh. Seriously.
Why? Stay out of my vagina.
No, I
I
know.
don't want you in there. I don't want you thinking about it. I just want to be. I'm just trying to exist. And that's the hard part is growing up in purity culture. All you want to do is just exist in this world, but you are consistently sexualized. You're consistently a target. You're consistently afraid that your shoulders are going to cause a man to lust after you. And what if that happens? And at the same time, make sure you're pretty enough to find a righteous husband. There's no winning. And it's just so frustrating. I feel like you would know the answer to this. Where in the Bible does it talk about women needing to be virgins for their husbands? Does it exist anywhere?
Listen, there are so many things in the Bible that I feel like people have added or majorly twisted, and I think we see a huge projection and hypocrisy today, with this war against queer people. A lot of people in the church say we have to protect the children from trans people because they think that drag queens or trans people or queer people or whatever are sexualizing children. I know a lot of trans people. I know I've been to drag queen story hour. I've never once, and my kids have never once been sexualized by a queer person. I was sexualized by Christian men in the church. Why was the question never about why do girls have to cover up so men don't lust after them? Why is the question not like, why are men lusting after girls?
Or children.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's just aggravating. Not to mention, and then this is a whole side topic we don't have to really get into, but I just have to say that if we're taking the Bible literally, why are we not focusing on the incestuous relationships with Lot? Why are we not focusing on how he gave up his daughters to be raped by the townspeople? It's like, where do we draw the line of what we need to take literally and how we're supposed to completely revolve our entire lives around this book that has a lot of really questionable things in it?
I still identify Christian. My faith is very different than it used to be, but I love the teachings of Jesus. I love following Jesus. And I've come to realize, and this is just a fact, everybody cherry picks the Bible. Nobody follows it 100% literally. It would be impossible to, because the Bible has conflicting worldviews within it. There is no such thing as one biblical worldview, and people that say they take the Bible literally, they don't. They don't send their wives out to tents for 7 days when they're on their period. They wear mixed fabrics. They still go and
Yeah.
eat shellfish. They don't take it literally. And even the whole idea of like, well, that's prescriptive versus descriptive. Like, no, that's made up. That's man-made. And so like my thing now is you can use the Bible to oppress people and to harm marginalized groups, or you can use the Bible to liberate and to bring freedom. And you can choose which one you do, because there are verses for both. And I just choose to do the one that liberates.
That is such a great point, and I love that so much. Taking what's a better way of saying this? Understanding who you are as a person based on how you want to use what you perceive to be the word of God to empower or oppress. I think it's as simple as that. How do you want to show up in this world? How do you want to treat others? Is it going to be Christ-like in the way that Christ presented himself in the Bible, or are you going to cherry pick verses based on your own agenda to harm other people? Simple as that.
Yeah, I think too many people read the words of Jesus through the lens of Paul or through the lens of the rest of the Bible, as opposed to reading the rest of the Bible through the lens of Jesus, which is
Yeah.
very different.
So, wow, having that guilt put upon you with your father's death, especially having people say, well, you weren't faithful enough for your family. I don't know if you mentioned this here yet, but I know in our pre-call you said you were getting messages of, well, your family clearly wasn't doing something right because he still
Yeah.
passed away. Do you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, I think that was a very eye-opening moment for me. And this was when I really started deconstructing, though I wouldn't have called it that. But just things started to not make sense. Because we are Pentecostal and charismatic and believed in faith healing and name it and claim it and all that stuff, a lot of people around us, the Christians around us who, and we had hundreds of people from all over the world, probably even thousands, praying for my dad's healing. And this was not everybody, but instead of them saying, well, God just didn't answer your prayer, we couldn't do that. We couldn't put the blame on God. So we had people tell us, well, God didn't heal my dad because of some unresolved sin in our family's life. And of course, my brain goes to, I had sex before marriage. We had people tell us God didn't heal my dad because my dad was out of God's will because he was pastoring at the time instead of doing evangelism. And we had people that kind of did the more gaslighting route where they say, well, God did actually heal your dad. He just gave him his ultimate healing in heaven. And that one honestly pissed me off the most because I'm like, God knows that was not what I was praying for.
Yeah.
There's just like toxic positivity too. My whole world just completely crashed before my eyes. I was 23 when my dad died. And I mean, he was such a huge, so much of my life, my decisions, where I went to college, like everything was so focused on what my dad wanted. And now I didn't have him anymore. And he was my best friend. And then a lot of Christians were just so dismissive of our pain and kind of wanting us to hurry up and be happy again because a sad Christian is a bad witness and is a bad testimony.
Ooh.
And we're supposed to be joyful and we're supposed to be the light of the world. And who's going to want Jesus if, the people that follow Jesus are sad? And so I started to get really like kind of angry inside because I could not help but be sad because my dad was no longer with me. I was never going to see my dad again. And I just kind of went really introspective with some things because I realized a lot of the Christians in my life were not safe people to be honest with about my actual feelings. And so I just kind of started internalizing some things and quietly started questioning things over the next few years. I would say I probably deconstructed my more Pentecostal, charismatic beliefs first. As you know, kind of like once you pull the string, everything starts to unravel, and there was a lot more unraveling to do.
Yeah, something I want to zoom in on that just hit me really hard. A sad Christian is a bad witness. And that's something that I don't think is talked about enough. Just the co opting of feelings, of you can have these feelings because if you're happy, that means you're being blessed. That means you're righteous. That means you're in God's favor. And if you had any of these, what we are going to perceive as negative feelings, you must be doing something wrong. The blame is on you. God is not blessing you. Why are you not repenting enough or reading your scriptures enough or all of these things? You're not enough, and that's why you're sad. And that's such a dangerous approach because on one side, the happiness thing makes sense of, oh, if you're happy, you're being blessed. But they fail to recognize what the opposite is. And there are some people who are going through depression, even postpartum depression, something that chemically you just can't fix right away. You need to get help for that in some cases. And I think it's just a really dangerous way of making people spiral out thinking that they're doing something wrong and that they're not allowed to have these feelings. And then when you leave this high control group, all of a sudden it just vomits out and all of the, your body keeps the score. Things start to go awry and you're just like, why am I not centered? Why am I not okay? And I think it's because eventually it has to come out.
Yeah, and the Pentecostal denominations, that's Assemblies of God, Church of God, Pentecostal Holiness, there's a bunch of different ones. They're also notorious for demonizing mental health. My parents weren't quite as bad, but definitely the world around us was, if you have anxiety, it's just a demon. You need to cast that thing out. If you have depression, no, you don't. You just need Jesus. I was very against going to therapy. I can't tell you how many times I heard, like, why would I need to go to therapy when I can just go to Jesus? And so I had a very negative view of therapy for a long time because in my head, it was just unneeded. I don't need that. I have the Bible and I have Jesus. I don't need anything else. Turns out therapy is very helpful. I'm of the mind now that I think everybody needs therapy. Even if you don't think you do, like, it's just helpful to have someone to just unleash things out on. Although my therapy sessions were pretty much me praying. And I was notorious for any time I would pray, whether that was in youth group, in the altar call, in pop like circles, or just at home, I would start bawling because I think those were my therapy sessions that I wasn't getting elsewhere. It was just like me unleashing all my inner thoughts, and which was healing. Like, I would always feel better after the fact, but I wasn't necessarily hearing anything back. I would feel better, but it was, yeah.
Well, I think that was it. That was your outlet, right? If you're
Yeah.
not allowed to have those feelings elsewhere, if you can be by yourself and give those feelings to God, at least you're able to purge all of that emotion.
Yeah, and I have had spiritual experiences that felt very real, that felt like God was with me, which just kind of further enforced the belief that I don't need therapy because I can feel good after a good prayer sesh and move on. I think a lot of people that didn't grow up religious, where this idea is a foreign concept, a lot of them were like, well, how could you be so stupid to let yourself be indoctrinated? But there are things along the way. I mean, one, you're a toddler when you start hearing a lot of this stuff. So it's not like you're thinking everyone around me is lying to me. And
Yeah.
that's actually not the truth, too, because I think everyone around me also was believing it and was also indoctrinated by their parents and then their parents. And, it's a vicious cycle that can be really hard to break out of if you're raised in that world. And also, there's enough good that happens that keeps you convinced that the theology and the ideology is correct.
Yep.
You see, the church only shows the really good things that they're doing. They say, like, look, we helped this kid go to college. We saved this family from starvation. We got them a house. We're building homes in Mexico. We started an orphanage in Ethiopia. And it's all these really good works, and there are good things. And there's still good things that happen in a lot of these groups today, but that's all you see. And so when all you're seeing is good, it makes it so much easier to reinforce that you're on the good side and that everything you're doing is good, because no one's going to come up there and talk about the harm and the anxiety and the depression and the, cover up of abuse and all of those things that are also happening at the same time.
Yeah, of course. And you're afraid to speak up because you don't want to be the odd one out because you're told by design that anything that is bad that's happening to you is your fault. It's not the system, it's not God, it's you. So why would you feel emboldened to say anything about your harmful experiences? And sometimes when people do speak out, they're demonized even further. And so, of course, it's this echo chamber, this closed circuit where this is your reality. Like you're saying, you're learning these things as a toddler, as a child. a child is reliant on their environment, on their caregivers to tell them what is reality. It's not even right and wrong. It's your entire reality is shaped. By the time you're 7, your brain is programmed and wired to think things about the world, to think truths about the world, which is why it's so hard when you leave to untangle and figure out what is real and what's not, because your brain is literally wired that way. And so that's what I think is harder for people to understand is when you leave a cult, why can't everything just be fine now? No, you have to question your entire reality if you were raised
Yeah.
in it, because things are mismatched and put in places that they shouldn't be. And so, yeah, it's really difficult. And I want to talk more about your deconstruction. But first, we have to go back, especially because we are following this interview up from the documentary, the Prime documentary, Shiny Happy People 2. I want to talk more about your teen experiences and those big events that were thrown to indoctrinate the teens further, to further perpetuate their reality.
Yeah, I mean, I loved going to Acquire the Fire. It was a lot of fun. Like in hindsight, I don't have negative experiences from it, but I also fully bought into everything that was being taught and said. The whole idea of the Columbine shooting and that, you could be a martyr for Christ. I thought there was a decent chance that that would be how I would die one day, whether I was on a mission trip, whether it was when I went to school. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of times when I was probably preteen where I would fantasize and envision that exact scenario. And, on days where I felt maybe a little more spiritual, I'd be like, of course, I'm going to say yes. I believe in God. Like, God, I am willing to die. And what an honor it would be to die. Like there was also a piece of me that kind of wanted to go that way because you're taught the martyrs get the bigger jewels and the celebration in heaven and they have the bigger mansions and there would be no greater calling, no greater cause than to die for God. I mean, we also would read not just from Columbine, but I remember reading and youth group talking about the Fox's Book of Martyrs. And then DC Talk also had a Jesus Freak book that was also all about martyrs. And you would just read all these different martyrs' stories. And I feel like it would almost always come around to be like, would you do that? Could you go through that? The whole point of it was to always be like, you should always be close enough to Jesus where you would be willing to die for him. I mean, and even as kids, we would sing that song that's like, I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir. And it's all about being in the Lord's army. Like the words are, I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never zoom over the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. And it's this whole song about being in the Lord's army, and we were called Warriors for Christ. And public schools were Satan's playground. Like those were your mission field to go in and combat the evils of Satan and sin for Jesus. We're also taught that we were going to be persecuted, which was in hindsight really ironic because I went to public school my 7th grade and freshman year of high school, and I tried to be persecuted. Like I had a giant sign on my locker that said Jesus saves souls, and I
No,
witnessed
you
all the
did
time.
it.
I did. And I thought for sure some atheist was going to come up and be like, "Oh, you believe in Sky Daddy?" No one ever did. People pretty much just left me alone. And then also you have clubs in public school like Fellowship of Christian Athletes and Youth Alive. Those were both Christian clubs that I was in. And then once or twice a year, you had See You at the Pole, where you would go around the flagpole at the school before school starts and pray. And it was advertised. It was a thing. I was never persecuted. There was not ever one time where I was disadvantaged because I was a Christian. If anything, it was more of a pro that I was a Christian because most everyone that went to the schools were Christian or Christian adjacent anyway, and which I think is true for for America as a whole. Like it's very hard. I mean, how many churches, especially in the South? There's churches on every corner, and literally, you, especially like today, you have Christians in the government, in leadership, and still to this day, the idea that American Christians are persecuted is still something that is taught.
Yeah. I'm just taking all of that in, all of the imagery. We had our own army song, and I thankfully forgot most of the words, but it was the We Are As the Army of Helaman. And it was like one of the major songs that they would sing at youth events. And along with A Child's Prayer, I think. I don't remember which one. You guys in the
Mm.
comments are going to remember. But beautiful music. I mean, it'll bring you to tears for sure, because well arranged. It's beautiful. But anyway, um, just imagining little
Mhm.
April going to her locker and looking around to see if anyone wants to challenge her sign or talk about her sign. And yeah, I think that's really sweet, especially coming from homeschooling and going into public school, feeling like, okay, taking on the
Mhm.
world, Satan's playground, that's scary. Going into public school in high school is scary anyway, but you're not having any concept of what it's about to be like, and you've been told all these horrible things about it. Was it just terrifying to jump into that?
I would say I was more anxious than scared because, again, I wanted to be persecuted because
Okay,
my
let's do this.
my dad would tell these stories of his time in high school. He had this one story where he wanted to be a DJ for a local rock station, and like they partnered with the high school that he went to. This was a public school, and he volunteered to do it, and he got picked. And you were supposed to just pick your own rock songs to play, and instead, my dad played like a really slow hymn version of the old rugged cross. And like I think he played Andre Crouch, and he'd said how, like, people came in, like, he had locked the door, and like the principal came in and was like, "Hey, the radio station's calling. You need to stop playing that. You need to play rock music. They're getting complaints." And my dad was really funny. And so he would tell this story in churches and everyone's just laughing. And he's like, "No, you're going to let me play my music. I have to listen to crap every day." Anyway, they end up letting him just play the music. And it was this really funny story. And I remember thinking, like, I want to have my own stories like that to tell one day. And so I remember being more excited to go to public school because when you're homeschooled, and you want to win people to Jesus, you can't really do that when your only classmates are your two brothers who are already Christian. Um, so I was excited for the opportunity to get my own stories. And I actually did get one story. It kind of backfired on me, actually. But and so this was in seventh grade. I tell a story in my book, but my English teacher gave us all an essay, and the prompt was, how do we keep schools safe? So obviously, like, this is right after Columbine shooting. Everyone's talking about school shootings and how to, and school safety was a huge topic back then, which it should still be, but that's another conversation. And so I wrote my entire paper on the way to keep schools safe was to put God back in school and to put prayer back in school. And that, the reason why there are all these terrible things happening in schools was because we had kicked God out, which was also something that we believed about America too, that when, which we'll get to that. But so I wrote then my whole paper on why the importance of putting God back in school. And I ended it with a line from a Carmen song. I don't know. You were raised Mormon. Did you know who Carmen was?
Uh-uh.
Okay, so he was Christian contemporary musical artist that was really big in evangelical circles in the 90s. I loved him. He was actually, his music videos were ahead of its time. He was a great performer, but he had this one song called America Again, very Christian nationalist. That might have been like what radicalized me in hindsight. But one of the lines in this song was, if you want to see kids live right, stop handing out condoms and start handing out the word of God in schools. And then it goes into the chorus and it's like, the only hope for America is Jesus. And so it's this whole thing. I ended my paper like with that line, if you want to see kids live right, stop handing out condoms and start handing out Bibles. Now, remember, I'm 12. I'm in seventh grade. I don't even know what a condom is. I wrote it because Carmen sang about it so passionately that I was like, yeah, we
Uh-huh.
should stop doing that. I don't know what that is, but we should definitely stop it because Carmen said it. So I turned in my paper. And when we finally get the papers back, my teacher's passing them all out and I'm pounding. I'm like, I'm going to get persecuted. I know he's going to be mad at my paper. And he gets to me and he's like, I saved April's for last. April, will you come to the front, please? And I'm like, it's happening. It's happening. I'm going to get persecuted. It's finally here. And then he goes on to say, April got the highest grade in the class because she did exactly what I asked for. And it was so good that I want her to now read it in front of everybody.
Oh
So
my
I
gosh.
read my entire paper in front of my entire seventh grade English class. And I, like, some people have asked, are you sure he wasn't trolling you?
Yeah.
Yes. I thought so at first too, but he literally like leaned down and whispered, he's like, this was really good. I'm proud of you. Like, because he was a Christian, as most of them were in
Okay.
Texas. So I read it. And the only like quote unquote persecution, if you can even call it that, was in the halls after I read this paper. Word spread very, very quickly. But it wasn't about me being a preacher. It wasn't about me spreading the gospel. Everyone got hung up on the fact that I said condom
Uh-huh.
in 7th grade. All the boys, the middle school boys had a field day with that.
Uh-huh.
And so, I started some people referred to me as condom girl for a little bit. So, that's the most persecution I've received.
Is that when you figured out what it was?
I asked my parents, and I think I actually don't even remember what they said. I don't know that I even still fully I think I knew it had something to do with sex, which was really bad, but I still didn't understand it.
Yeah. That just reminds me of a time where I did a talent show with my friend and we were doing a dance and we got matching t-shirts that were little baseball shirts. We were also in 7th grade, actually maybe 6th. And they said All-Star 69 on it. We didn't know what that meant.
Oh.
And we got in so much trouble. We were in the bathroom. We were walking in to change back into our normal clothes, and we got yanked out by the vice principal who forced us to wear what I call the shame shirt, which is like
Mm.
an XXXL t-shirt of the school, whatever mascot. And I was so mad because I was like, what did I even do wrong? Because I was
Mm.
in student body. Like I was, it was a whole thing. But of course, by the end of the day, everyone knew what 69 meant because of
Yeah.
that. It's
Oh.
so dumb.
Oh my gosh, I know, backfired.
Yeah. So we talked about youth group, the events. I think now let's get into your deconstruction and how it relates to Christian nationalism.
Obviously started deconstructing when my dad died. And then probably the next really big thing that had happened was my brother, so one of my 2 brothers, came out to me as gay in 2015, and our family and really that entire world, like, I feel like homophobia was as essential as John 3:16, like, in the 90s and 2000s, and today in certain circles. There were times where when we were kids that we'd go to a restaurant, and I have a very distinct memory, especially of one, where the waiter we assumed was gay. He spoke a little more flamboyant than more feminine than I had heard anyone else, but I didn't think anything of it. I was probably 8. And, after he came to take our drink order, my dad said, "Okay, kids, we need to leave." And either me or my mom or someone asked why, and he said, "Well, that man is a homosexual."
Wow.
And I didn't really know what that meant, but I knew that that was bad. And so we left, and I remember this is a core memory, like, I can still see this man's face. I turned to look back at him as we were walking out, and I made eye contact with this waiter, and he just had such a hurt, pained look on his face.
Oh no, did he hear it?
I don't know if he heard us, but I think he knew why we were leaving because we were there and then we
Oh.
left. From my understanding in the moment, I think he knew because he looked hurt. And I remember feeling like what we were doing was wrong, but I trusted my dad and I trusted, my parents. I was a kid, so I just thought it was me that was wrong, because another thing that you're taught with like the doctrine of original sin is that we're all born sinners and that even our instincts are sinful, anything our flesh is sinful, and so you can't trust your own thoughts because your own thoughts are sinful by nature. It's easy to just say, well, I just must be wrong. And I was young, so my theology hadn't taught me to hate gay people yet. At that point, I just saw another person that it felt wrong that we would hurt him like that. So I knew my brother was also sitting at that table and grew up in that same world as me. And so I knew there was no way that he would choose to be gay. I was taught that gay people were either demon possessed, they were oppressed by a demon to make them choose being gay. So, like, a demon was usually involved, but no one was born gay. Like, we were taught it was impossible for anyone to be born gay because God makes everybody and God doesn't, quote unquote, make mistakes. And why would he make someone gay if it's an abomination, which is what we were taught? And so I just knew there was no way. Like, I just believed my brother, like, he had to have been born this way because he would not choose this after growing up in that same world. And he also believed everything and, witnessed to a lot of people just like I did. I remember he told me through, he was just bawling. And I was the first person that he had told, and he was 26 at the time. He was a year and a half younger than me. He said that he had known since middle school and just kept hoping that God would make him straight. He said he'd cried himself to sleep many nights begging God to make him straight. He kept thinking, well, maybe once I hit ninth grade, then I'll start to like girls. Maybe once I hit 12th grade, maybe once I'm in college, and it never changed. Even in that moment, like I just went over and I hugged him and I was also crying and I just said, it's okay. I love you. But I heard myself, because I was also indoctrinated in that moment. And, you're taught you don't want to enable someone's sin because if you don't condemn someone's sin when they tell you about it, then their blood's also going to be on your hands. And I didn't want my own brother's blood on my hands. And so, really, before I even realized it, I kind of heard myself say, well, we know what the Bible says in that moment. And he was like, yeah, I know. So initially he said like he just had to come out because it like that secret alone and that shame was just eating him up inside. He initially said that he was planning to be celibate because he agreed that it was wrong based on what we had both been taught, but he just couldn't. Nothing was working. God wasn't changing him. I'm attracted to men and I don't know how to, I cannot stop that. So I'm just going to be celibate for the rest of my life. And so him and I kind of together, he went along further. Like he discovered that there's actually affirming theology. There's actually ways to read the Bible that are just as valid as the other way that fully affirm the existence of queer people.
Can you tell me about that? Because this is the first time I've heard.
Yeah. So first of all, Jesus has that verse where he's talking about the eunuchs. It says some people are born eunuchs, some people are made eunuchs. And, he speaks about them very positively, like they just exist. And so there's scholars that interpret that to be like the kind of the queer people of Jesus's day. Probably the biggest affirmation, Paul says there's neither male nor female in the body of Christ, which I think affirms trans people. Also, when you go back to the Genesis story, a lot of people like to use the creation story as a way to condemn the existence of trans people. But if you actually read the story, it talks about how God created night and day, but that's not a binary because sunsets and sunrises exist. So those are two ends of a spectrum. It also says that God created land and sea, but that's also two ends of a spectrum because marshes and swamplands exist that don't necessarily fall in either category. And then when you talk about male and female, those are also two ends of a spectrum. And it just means those two extremes and then everything in between. And especially when you just, 1 to 2% of every human being that is born intersex, meaning they're born with both parts, either inside or outside. They can't help that. Like those people exist. And so you either have to just say those people don't matter, God didn't make them, or you have to accept that they exist and that maybe queer people are part of God's design from the beginning.
Mhm.
There's a movie called 1946, which is about the mistranslation of the word homosexual, because the word homosexual did not exist in any translation of the Bible until the year 1946. And whatever is condemned in there's power dynamics in play. People like to use Sodom and Gomorrah against gay people specifically, but Ezekiel says this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She was not hospitable and she did not take care of the poor. Like it has nothing to do with gay people. And there's no mention of orientation. The only thing that's mentioned in the Bible are acts. And every mention of that is a power dynamic. Because back then it was very patriarchal and there was a role to it. And that's a whole theological debate. There are scholars that have books this big about this exact topic that are very much worth going into. But yeah, I was just surprised that I realized it took me a while to become queer affirming. And I read all the scriptures. I read the clobber verses in Romans. That's where people get it a lot. And then, Matthew 19, where Jesus talks about divorce. Jesus is not talking about queer people. A lot of people use Matthew 19 as him condemning queer people. He says nothing about that. He's condemning divorce in that chapter, which a lot of Christians and evangelicals get divorced. So they ignore that part. So that goes back to the whole cherry picking thing where everybody cherry picks.
Yeah.
But I kind of realized it took me probably 3-4 years before I was able to say like, okay, I'm queer affirming now, from when he came out. And I think I kind of came to the point where I realized, okay, there are scriptures that I think do support an unaffirming theology. And there are scriptures that support affirming theology. And I was never 100% on either. I think you could use scripture to really go either way, depending on how you want to interpret it. And so I just realized I'm going to err on the side of love. And if God has a problem with that, I'll handle that. I would rather err on being loving, on being too kind, on being too accepting than err on being a bigot and being hateful. And once I don't know how to explain it to people who are still unaffirming in Christianity. I've tried many times. But once I made the decision to accept and affirm queer people, I felt so much peace. When you grow up in this world, everyone's like, come to Jesus, you have freedom in Christ. Follow all our rules and you'll have freedom in Christ. Like, come to our small group and you'll have freedom in Christ. Like, freedom in Christ is this thing that everyone aspires to have in Christianity. And I felt so much freedom once I finally decided to affirm queer people. And then I realized I had never loved queer people before that moment. I thought I had. I thought you say love the sinner, hate the sin. But I was never able to have a genuine relationship with a queer person because I always had an ulterior motive, because I viewed their existence as a sin. I think that's a major problem that a lot of Christians today have, is they think it's a quote unquote lifestyle. It's not a lifestyle. It's literally someone's identity. It's who somebody is. It's like saying, oh, you're living a straight lifestyle. Like what does that even mean? Like,
Yeah.
I think since deconstructing, one of the most beautiful things has been finding God in the places the church told me not to look. I've seen so much beautiful expressions of faith and love and kindness within the queer community that I never would have been able to see if I had stayed in a really dogmatic world.
Yeah. Well, I think that's just it. It's shifting perspective, because when you're so tunnel visioned, you're conditioned to be tunnel visioned. It's impossible to see what's on the periphery. It's impossible to, like you said, find love in places you're not supposed to look. And it's easy for them to demonize people who do find love in those places, because they're taught that you can only find love here. This is the straight and narrow. This is where you need to be. And this is where everybody needs to be. And if they're not there, something's wrong. And so deconstruction is really being able to open that tunnel vision, to see the fuller picture, to see a different perspective, and to, in turn, find more compassion and love for those who didn't necessarily fit into the box that you were told is the way to live.
Yeah, because the world is nuanced. Everyone is human, and every person, I think, is capable of good and bad. We're capable of love, and we're capable of causing harm. And to go around and, either everyone's perfect and good or everyone's only evil is just not reality.
Yeah, I agree with that. This is such a hard question, but when your brother came out to you and you were still deconstructing the scriptures or the translation of scriptures that supported not loving gay people or queer people, how long did it take for you to really look at that and question, do I want to throw all of this out because I love my brother and I want to accept him fully?
I think because I loved my brother, I was willing to question my theology. Because, like, in the moment when he came out to me, it was another moment where my heart disagreed with my head, where my heart was disagreeing with the theology that I had. Because my instinct was to just hold my brother and say, it's okay. It doesn't matter. Like, I know you and I love you and you're going to be fine. And, and I said variations of that, but that was what I was feeling inside. It was the indoctrination that was telling me, you can't enable this. You don't want your brother to go to hell. And, the fear that came in was from the theology. And so I think a difference was that I wanted to be wrong. I wanted the theology to be wrong because I loved my brother so much, but I also really loved God. And I knew ultimately I would choose God if God was saying it was wrong, in that moment. So it was probably, I read books. I read the Bible, obviously. I prayed a lot about it. I think one thing that's really important for my story, and it can freak some people out if they're not spiritual, but I always felt God pulling me towards an affirming theology. There was like something sacred that was kind of tugging me that way. And I think the biggest example of this that I can give was 6 months before my brother came out to me. I had a dream that he came out to me,
Whoa.
and he ended up coming out to me in the exact same way at my exact same kitchen table. We were seated in the same spot. And so, having had that dream, I told my spouse about it because we were married at the time. I was like, "What do you think it means? Do you think Andrew's gay?" And, Peter's like, "I mean, I don't know. He's never acted like he is. He doesn't say he is." He would say a lot of the same kind of homophobic things and jokes as we would. But there was this kind of still small voice that was telling me that I should take this dream seriously. I wanted to be a safe place. If Andrew's my brother, if he was holding on to the secret, I didn't want him to be alone. I would figure out the theology later, but and that like I was just concerned for my brother. And so when he came to visit, I purposely was kind of planting seeds to kind of let him know, like, you can tell me, like, I can be a safe person. I would say things, I think you could be a Christian and be struggling with homosexuality. Like, again, I wasn't very progressive. So I was saying things that at the time felt like a loving thing to say, and he was like, yeah, no, I agree with that. And so then when he came out to me, it felt like, oh, God had his hand in this and was wanting him to come out to me. So like, I really do believe that this entire even deconstruction path has been really led by this like holy and sacred kind of spirit, which I know is like really triggering for people who are who are not religious at all, but that's I don't have any other language for that. So it's felt like a really spiritual journey and experience to become queer affirming.
Wow, that's so cool. Because I wonder if you didn't have that dream, if you would have been as open or as keenly aware of the situation when he did come out to you. I think it's cool that you were primed for that.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea if he would have even come out prior, if I wasn't setting those things, but I know he had told me too, like he was hitting a breaking point as far as keeping that secret. So I think he probably would have come out to me at some point, but I was more prepared. It wasn't like this shock that may have been if I didn't have that dream.
Yeah. So let's talk about the other things that helped you fully deconstruct some red flags.
Okay. So I mean, there's definitely a lot of other things, but I guess
Yeah.
in the middle of all of this, my spouse was dealing with gender dysphoria, though we didn't have the language for that. For the record, we met at Pat Robertson's University. That was where we met in grad school there. Another piece of my story that we probably don't have time to get into today was I used to be a producer for 700 Club Interactive. So I worked there as well. Talk about Christian nationalism. But so that's the world in which I meet my spouse. And a month into us dating, Beecher is their name. They tell me that when they were in the 5th grade, that they tried on their sister's clothes and liked it. And then immediately took it off and felt so much shame and never did anything again. And of course, when Beecher's telling me this, they're bawling. Like they're telling me like the word like they murdered somebody was the emotion that matched the story. And I remember even I was very naive. I didn't really even know about trans people because our war against queer people was more focused on gay marriage at the time. I hadn't really evolved into trans people yet. So I didn't know anything really about gender dysphoria, and neither did Beecher, because we both came up from a very Christian evangelical environment. And I just remember thinking, like, okay, that's it. You did one thing in 5th grade and you didn't do anything else? And Beatrice like, yeah, I was never going to tell anyone. And like, was so sad. And I just remember thinking, this is not a big deal. I don't understand why you're acting this way. You did one thing one time. And also like, I had known I had had sex at this point because this was after I'd thrown myself into purity culture. So I'm thinking like, oh, that's nothing. You should see what I've done. We were like out sinning each other. So I didn't think much of it. I should have, knowing how emotional Beecher was telling me. Over the course of, we got married about a year and a half later. Beecher had to go to therapy because their gender dysphoria really started flaring up in our relationship because they also threw themselves deep into purity culture. And they thought that basically whenever they got married, they were going to marry a virgin. They were both going to be virgins because Beecher was also a virgin. And then, God would just heal them and take away their weird, demonic, whatever it was, desires, and that everything would be fixed. And so obviously on the first date, because I'm maybe too much of an open book. So literally on our very first date, I verbally vomited every bad thing I had ever done to Beecher. I was like, you got to know who I am. I'm damaged goods, because I really did believe I was damaged goods. And so I feel like I needed to be upfront about that, and so I told them, I'd had sex, I was assaulted, and then I had sex, my whole sob story. And I'm sorry, can you accept me as I am? And Beecher did. But also the fact that I wasn't a virgin really triggered them, because it went against their plans and their dreams for a wife. Like, and they will tell you they were messed up during this period. Like, I'm not saying anything that they would not say. In fact, sidebar, we actually have a 13-part podcast series called The Non-Binary Marriage that goes really into details on our specific marriage story. So they came out non-binary. Spoiler alert, they're non-binary now. So I won't get into everything because it's long. But basically, we get married, and we tried to, being the token Pentecostal, Beecher's Baptist, when they started telling me about what they were feeling, I was like, that's a demon. They were going to a Christian counselor at the time who also told them, yeah, you probably got a demon. It's probably 3. Beecher's like, yeah, I think it's 3 too. And I was like, yeah, 3 demons sounds right. So I have literally, Beecher asked me to, so I had consent, but I have literally laid hands on Beecher to try to cast the demons out of them, being the Pentecostal.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So no demons came out. So we kind of morphed over years. We've been married 11 years now.
Wow.
And I would say for the first 6 or 7 years, we were just trying to deal with it in the best way that we could. Anytime we would talk to anyone in the church about it, Beecher worked for a church. I was a worship leader at a large church. They would just say, well, that's definitely bad. You're going to want to pray that away. That's demonic. You need to fast, read scripture, name it and claim it, rebuke it. We did all the things. We did everything. We did everything that the church told us to do. In fact, right when my second child was born, so this was in 2019, Beecher actually went to a 12-step group for this, because we were like, well, maybe it's just an addiction, like this desire you have to be feminine, which doesn't even make sense. Like when you say it out loud, we're like, you're just addicted to it. I don't know. But that didn't work. So literally everything that we tried that the church told us to do, every fix that the church had, just give it to Jesus, all those things didn't work. And the more things didn't work, and the more Beecher still felt dysphoria, the darker they got. And they got to a really, really dark place. They never harmed themselves, but they started talking in that way, which really scared me. And I just kind of got to a point where I realized, and I told Beecher this too, I would rather have you alive in a dress than dead in men's clothes. And that was our breaking point, really, as we realized that that might be the reality. When 2020 hits, the pandemic, we're all in quarantine, we're stuck at home, and Beecher didn't have anything else to distract them from their own identity. And I think we had heard about trans people, and we knew that that was bad. And so I think we were scared that maybe Beecher was trans, but neither of us wanted to say that out loud. I think we were kind of keeping that a secret from each other, even though we were both thinking it, because in our heads, that could be that was the worst case scenario, just based on what we had been taught about queerness. We just kind of both were like, okay, we just need to ask the question, who are you? And what is this? And we don't have to do anything with what the answer is, but we need to actually figure out what the answer is and not be afraid of it anymore. And so that's what Beecher did. Beecher got a new counselor that focused more on trans issues and gender identity, and was actually trained in that realm too, because their other Christian counselor, Beecher had to tell them what gender dysphoria was. Just
not helpful.
Yeah, it wasn't the most helpful. Through therapy, and then Beecher just praying a lot and reading scripture. And that's the thing too, like God was a huge piece of this journey as well. Beecher just felt peace about being in between. And they just felt like, I don't really feel comfortable being male, but I don't really feel comfortable being female either. I kind of just feel in between. When you come from a world that has very strong gender roles, that enhances gender dysphoria. especially for men, because there is some wiggle room for girls to be more masculine. You have like tomboys and girls can play sports, and it's not looked down on as much, at least in the world I was in. But for men, it's like men can never be feminine, which I think is a form of sexism anyway, because they view women as weak, the weaker vessel, all that stuff. So once they came out and started accepting themselves, and then I accepted them, our marriage actually got a lot better. Beecher got healthier. Beecher was a more present parent. It's been just positive. Like, we've been really good. And also, like, early on too, we were both trying really hard to fit into the gender roles of what a wife does and what a husband does. And so I tried to cook our meals initially, and I am not a good cook. And I would like melt lids on my casserole dish because I forgot that they're plastic. Like, literally, I've ruined an entire casserole because I put it in the oven with the plastic lid on top.
Oh my gosh.
It's not my strong suit. Where Beecher, on the other hand, actually really enjoys cooking and is really good at it. But we felt weird, like, letting Beecher cook because that's not the man's role. That's the feminine role. And like, I needed to be the feminine role. And so, and I was the one that loved playing video games. I brought the Xbox into the marriage, and that was a little weird. And I was like, I probably should try to be more feminine, and Beecher needs to be more masculine. And then anytime we would go to marriage conferences in the church, they're all so stereotypical of like, yeah, men want sex all the time. Women never want sex, and men do this and women do this, and men are the tough ones, and women, need to rely on their spouses. And I don't know, like, anytime there was like a little critter that would show up in our house, like a little rat or a mouse or whatever, I was always the braver one than Beecher was. And we're like, what is wrong with us? Like, we just always felt weirder and weirder, like feeling like we didn't belong. But it was so natural, like trying to force ourselves to fit into those gender roles went against our very basic nature, and it felt forced, and it made us really miserable. So once Beecher came out, and we are like, you know what? Let's just live with the best way that works for us.
Mm-hmm.
And literally our lives got so much better, and we became so much happier too.
Yeah, and that's what we talk about is if you want to have those specific gender roles in your home, if that works for you, then that's awesome. But we're not advocating for one side or the other. We're advocating for choice, and we're advocating for not coerced choice. We
Yeah.
want people to feel empowered to make their own decision and not feel guilty when they make a decision that goes against what someone else is telling them to do. And I think it's great that you both were able to find that balance and figure out what works for you, because ultimately it is about finding peace and happiness and about being together in a way that is harmonious and that is helpful for your entire family, for your kids and everyone. So I think that that's awesome.
Yeah, it's been very, really helpful. I mean, it is funny though, us being happy and having our lives be better is not enough for the world that we came from. It's
Yeah.
been really funny to hear the conspiracy theories of why Beecher is non-binary. I think our favorite theory so far is that they became non-binary because they used to watch The Walking Dead, and that was a demonic show, and a demon came through the TV into Beecher and suddenly made them want to start wearing dresses.
Oh my gosh.
As an actual theory from someone we know.
Yikes. Yeah, the mental gymnastics that people have to do to make sure that their theology is not rocked, because if they have to
Mhm.
question their theology, they have to question their identity, and that's too much for people. And so they will make up fun stories. Yeah, that's a lot. So I know there's a lot we haven't even got to with your story, and maybe there's a live in here somewhere that we could do after this, but let's talk about your book and how you have kind of deconstructed that Christian nationalism mindset.
Yeah, so the book Star Spangled Jesus, I think it goes into way more detail than what we were able to cover here. Again, still Christian today. I think one of the biggest dangers to our country right now is Christian nationalism. We're seeing it play out in the political sphere very loudly. Right now, I go into the definitions of Christian nationalism and all of that and leaving that behind, and I didn't realize I was a Christian nationalist until after I had deconstructed, because when you're in it, you just think you're being a good Christian, which for us was love God, love people, exclusions apply, and then vote Republican. There was an equation we equated being Christian with being part of the GOP. That was the Christian party. And I don't think any party represents Christianity 100%, but there are definitely some things happening that I would say go against the teachings of Jesus, that it's still flabbergasting to me to see a lot of my fellow Christians support a very unchristlike person in the name of Christianity. But I get way more into that in my book. So now I feel like where I have landed is that the world is way more complicated and more nuanced than I ever thought. I think there's a lot of beauty in the world that the church tries to demonize, and God is much bigger than I was taught when we were Christian nationalists. It says for God to love the world, not for God so loved America. It's just been a really beautiful experience to no longer have to hold such a heavy and harmful ideology, and just to be able to see people as humans and not see people as a project in need of saving really just makes life that much better.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something to be said about shifting the scales so that you're no longer positioning yourself above others. And I think it's something that happens unintentionally, maybe, well, in some cases intentionally, but with these high control groups, their main priority is us versus them, and we have the truth and you don't. Therefore, you are under us and we have to save you, which also creates a superiority complex and ultimately just makes you literally look down on people and view them as less than, as a project, like you're saying. And there's something so beautiful to be said about recognizing that we're all humans doing the best that we can with the information that we have, and just coming at each person individually and not making blanket statements across an entire group of people. And we try really hard not to do that on the show. We talk about people-specific experiences and systems, not people, and ways that people are manipulated and coerced, not necessarily these people are evil and these people are good, because I think the biggest part of this conversation today is nuance is everything, and understanding that everyone is unique, and understanding that we're all on our own journey, facing our own issues and doing our best as humans. And if we can come at our peers with that same type of love and compassion that we have for ourselves, things would just be so much better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a lot of empathy and kindness that is lacking in the world today. And the world would be a lot better if we could see people as people instead of enemies or, opponents.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been such a great conversation with you, April, and I'm excited to watch the documentary and see the role that you played in illustrating the ways in which the Teens for Jesus, Warriors for Jesus was so widespread and really a part of the mainstream society of the time. And yeah, is there anything else that we didn't say that you're like, I absolutely want to make sure I say this thing?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I will say the one thing I always try to end on a little bit of hope, because I know there's a lot of people that probably know people that are still caught up in this world, or maybe they're caught up in the world or have loved ones. I don't know. But just to say that people can change, and I was a true believer, and I was able to wake up and change. And so there's hope for other people as well.
That's a good Linda Listen. Did you have a different Linda Listen? Or should we make that your Linda Listen?
Oh, that could be my Linda Listen.
Okay. Yeah, I love it. Well, amazing. How can people find you and support you? Drop your handles, your ats, all the things.
Sure. I'm at April Ajoy. That's AJOY on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Threads, really all the places. If it's a social media, I'm probably there at April Ajoy. I also co-host a podcast called The Tim and April Show, where we weekly rant about Christian nationalism today. So it's more current events. And yeah, and then my book, Star Spangled Jesus, you can get that wherever books are sold. There's also an audiobook that I narrated, which was a fun experience. So yeah, I am out there.
Amazing. I do look forward to reading your book. I didn't have time in the short amount of time that we snagged you for this interview, but I will definitely add it to my list. I've appreciated your time today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So guys, make sure to leave those words of encouragement down below. We especially love to hear if you came over from the documentary, if you were searching her up wanting to hear more of her story. We always try and grab people from documentaries to give the full unedited version of their story, because we know not everything can make it onto these shows. And we appreciate you finding us over here. Welcome to the rabbit hole. If you've been here for a while, we appreciate your love and support. As always, the best way to support the podcast is interacting with the post in any way. If you want to support further, we have a Patreon at patreon.com/cults2consciousness. We have merch at cults2consciousness.com. We are going to Mexico. There are only a few days left to sign up at the end of October. So if you want to go, link is in the description. And if you like this video, I will link 2 more down here below. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.